Chapter 4. Revolt of 1857, the First War of Indian Independence. Reading objectives. Consequences. Causes of the First War of Indian Independence. 1857 Mutiny, major events. The suppression of the First War of Indian Independence. After effects. 1857 is the year when the greatest mass uprising of Indians against British took place for the very first time. The uprising had its centers all over the country. Originating from the army created by the British but comprising Indian soldiers, the revolt spread through the masses. The resentment in people's hearts boiled over into uprising, and this uprising is called the Sepoy Mutiny or the First War of Independence in Indian history. Enrich yourself. Bahadur Shah Zafar II and Revolt of 1857. As the Indian Rebellion of 1857 spread, the Indian regiments seized Delhi and acclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar II their nominal leader. Zafar was viewed as a figure who could unite all Indians, Hindus and Muslims alike, and someone who would be acceptable to the Indian princes as sovereign. Zafar was the least threatening and least ambitious of monarchs, and the restoration of the Mughal Empire would presumably be more acceptable as a uniting force to these rulers than the domination of any other Indian kingdom. Now an octogenarian, Zafar did, although he had deep reservations, allow his name to be used as titular leader of the revolt. War of Independence is a more appropriate description, although because the war began with soldiers in the employment of the British, rebelling against their officers, it was called a mutiny. What even description is preferred? It was a war in which the people of India rebelled against rule by a foreign, colonial power, and in allowing his name to be used, Shah Bahadur II did so as the legal sovereign in theory of India. When the victory of the British became certain, Zafar took refuge at Humayun's tomb at the outskirts of Delhi and hid there. British forces led by Major Hartsong surrounded the tomb and compelled his surrender. Zafar, found guilty to treason, was exiled to Rangoon, Burma in 1858 along with his wife Zeenat Mahal. Nonetheless, it marked the end of more than 3 centuries of Mughal rule in India. The British declared Victoria of the United Kingdom as sovereign, later Empress, of India, which itself indicates that she did not claim sovereignty before 1858. Bahadur Shah II died in exile on November 7, 1862. He was buried near Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon, at the site that later became known as Bahadur Shah Zafar Dargah. Modern India views him as one of its first nationalists, someone who actively opposed British rule in India. Consequences. In May 1857, sepoys in the British East India Company's army rose up against the British. The unrest soon spread to other army divisions and civilian towns across north and central India. By the time it was over, hundreds of thousands or even millions of people had been killed. The British Home Government had disbanded the British East India Company, taking direct colonial control of the British rule in India. Also, the Mughal Empire ended, and the British sent the last Mughal emperor into exile in Burma. On the other hand, the social situation in India had worsened. The kings were against the British annexing their territories, and the nobility was crying out in protest against their lands being claimed by British. The zamindars had no zameen, land. The farmers and local people did not like to be exploited through various British policies like heavy revenues that they were forced to pay. The craftspersons were protesting against the British policies which hindered their profits and made them engage in unfair competition with imported goods from Britain. The soldiers, that is sepoys employed as British troops, were Indians. They did not like the ill treatment that they received from the British officers. Thus, all the classes in the society were troubled one way or the other way by the British. Their anger and resentment led to rebellions, revolts and protests against British rule. India witnessed a number of uprisings from 1763 to 1856 in almost all parts of the country, but these local protests were easy for the British to quell. Causes of the First War of Indian Independence 1857. The causes for the uprising of 1857 can be categorized as under: economic causes. The British policy of economically exploit India hurt all the sections of the society. The peasants suffered due to high revenue demands and the strict revenue collection policy. Artisans and craftsmen were rived by the large-scale influx of cheap British manufactured goods into India, which, in turn, made their handmade goods uneconomical to produce. People who made a living by following religious and cultural pursuits lost their source of livelihood due to the withdrawal of royal patronage caused by the displacement of the old ruling classes. A corrupt and unresponsive administration added to the miseries of the people. Political causes. The British regime was following a policy that annexed various Indian royal kingdoms and brought misery to royal nobility as well as the common people. The British policy of doctrine of lapse and subsidiary alliance was angering the ruling classes in India society. These policies had been resented by Rani Lakshmi Bai and Nana Sahib, who had been made victims. They had both rebelled in their territories against the British regime. The Mughals had been angered because after Bahadur Shah I's demise there was domination by the British. The British announced that the Mughals would no longer be able to retain their title and positions as kings. Bahadur Shah I's successors were made to leave the Red Fort. The Muslims who greatly supported the Mughal rulers felt offended. When Lord Dalhousie annexed Awadh and other territories, the territorial armies were disbanded. The soldiers were unemployed with no alternate jobs, making them angry and resentful of the British. These people evoked ill feelings against the British in the hearts of the common people. Many rulers who were feeling unsafe due to British policies came out in support of the revolters, as the British treated Indians badly and with contempt. The Indians felt insulted and helpless, so they found way of protesting when the uprising occurred. The corrupt administration was oppressive and the Indian had enough of it. Social causes. The social reforms introduced by the British were looked upon with suspicion by the conservative sections of the Indian society. Reforms such as abolition of sati, legalization of widow remarriage and extension of Western education to women were looked upon as examples of interference in the social customs of the country. The social discrimination faced by the Indians due to the British attitude of racial superiority also led to much resentment. Educated Indians were denied promotions and appointments to high office. This turned them against the British. Religious causes. Many learned and also some illiterate and poor people in India had one fear in their heart that was common to all: the fear of forceful conversion to Christianity. During the British regime, many Christian missionaries had arrived in India. Some of these missionaries had converted many Indians and they were practicing Christianity now. These instances made the Indians suspect the British and resent the missionaries' presence in India. As the mosque and temple authorities were made to pay heavy taxes for the many pieces of lands owned by them, the people found a new reason to support their fiefs. The threat to religion was felt by people of all religions, and they all joined forces to fight against their common enemy, the British, and the Christian conversion. Many orthodox Hindu rituals and beliefs had got transformed into social evils in the society. The British were trying to bring about some changes and often interfered. This was resented by the Hindu community. The steps to abolish sati and child marriage and the banning of infanticide and polygamy did not go down well with them. Widow remarriage was encouraged, which angered the Hindus. Many people were ignorant and illiterate, so they found that the use of railways, telegraph and Western thought was a threat in some ways. They thought they were mediums of converting them to Christianity. When temple and mosque lands were taxed, people were enraged. The Western education had caused the Pandits and Maulvis to lose their positions as educators, so they felt threatened. Military causes. Indian soldiers formed 7 out of 8 of the total British troops in India. As they were an integral part of the Indian society, they too suffered the consequences of the oppressive British rule. Besides, they had other grievances. The Indian sepoys were looked upon as inferior beings and treated with contempt by their British officers. They were paid much less than the British soldiers. All avenues of the promotion were closed to them, as all the higher army positions were reserved for the British. Many sepoys in the British army belonged to different religions and castes. These sepoys wanted to affirm their religious beliefs. Hindu or Muslims, both were not allowed to have any mark of faith on their bodies or belongings. This hurt the religious sentiments of the sepoys' beliefs, such as the one held by Hindus that traveling across the seas was forbidden, was never considered by the British. They forced the Hindus to travel overseas to fight their wars. These were some resentments in the lives of the sepoys. Immediate causes. Discontent and resentment against British rule had been growing among the Indians for a long time. By 1857, the stage was set for a massive uprising. Only a spark was needed to set the country ablaze. That spark was provided by as small a thing as a rifle cartridge. The British brought the Enfield rifles to be used by the British Army in India. This rifle was to be used by inserting cartridges. The cartridges had greased paper cover that needed to be removed by tearing it off with the teeth. Shocking news awaited the sepoys. The greased paper cover had cow and pig fat on it. Hindus were repelled by the thought of cow fat, as they worshipped the cow, while the Muslims were shocked at the thought of putting their mouth to pig fat, which Islam forbids. Thus both Hindu and Muslim sepoys rebelled. They were appalled at the way the British were openly threatening their religious views. This event, referred to as the greased cartridges controversy, was the immediate cause that triggered the First War of Indian Independence of 1857. Mutiny. Major events. Mangal Pandey was a Hindu sepoy in the 34th Infantry at Barakpur in the British Army. He was the very first sepoy who refused to put his mouth to the cartridge. His protests were silenced when he was punished by hanging. Then, on the 24th of April 1857, some sepoys at Meerut also said that they would not use the greased cartridges. The main storm centers of the First War of Indian Independence of 1857 were at Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Jhansi, Arra and Awadh. Delhi. At Delhi, the nominal and symbolic leadership belonged to the Emperor Bahadur Shah, but the real command lay with a court of soldiers headed by General Bakht Khan, who had led the uprising of the Bareilly troops and brought them to Delhi. In the British Army, he had been an ordinary Subedar of artillery. Bakht Khan represented the popular and plebeian element at the headquarters of the uprising. After the British occupation of Delhi in September 1857, he went to Lucknow and continued to fight the British till he died in a battle on May 1859. The Emperor Bahadur Shah was perhaps the weakest link in the chain of leadership of the uprising. He had little genuine sympathy for the humble sepoys, who in turn did not trust him fully. Kanpur. Nana Sahib led from Kanpur. The adopted son of Baji Rao II, the last Peshwa, Nana Sahib expelled the English from Kanpur with the help of sepoys and proclaimed himself the Peshwa. At the same time, he acknowledged Bahadur Shah as the Emperor of India and declared himself to be his governor. The chief burden of fighting on behalf of Nana Sahib fell on the shoulders of Tantia Tope, one of his most loyal servants. Azimullah was another loyal servant of Nana Sahib. He was an expert in political propaganda. Lucknow. The uprising at Lucknow was led by Begum of Awadh, who had proclaimed her younger son, Birjis Qadar, as Nawab of Awadh. Helped by the sepoys at Lucknow, and by the zamindars and peasants of Awadh, the Begum organized an all-out attack on the British. Compelled to give up the city, the latter entrenched themselves in the Residency building. In the end, the siege of the Residency failed as the small British garrison fought back with exemplary fortitude and valor. Jhansi. One of the greatest leaders of the First War of Indian Independence of 1857 and perhaps one of the greatest heroines of Indian history, was the young Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. The young Rani joined the rebels when the British refused to acknowledge her right to adopt her heir to the Jhansi Gaddi, annexed her state, and threatened to treat her as an instigator of the rebellion of the sepoys at Jhansi. She fought like a true heroine. Tales of her bravery and courage and military skill have inspired her countrymen even since. Driven out of Jhansi by British forces after a fierce battle in which even women were seen working as the batteries and distributing ammunition, she administered the oath to her followers that with our own hands we shall not bury Azad Shahi. She captured Gwalior with the help of Tantia Topi and her trusted Afghan guards. Maharaja Sindhia, loyal to the British, made an attempt to fight the Rani, but most of his troops deserted to join her. Sindhia sought refuge within Inglar at Agra. The brave Rani died fighting on the 17th of June 1858. Clad in the battle dress of a soldier and mounted on a charger. Besides her, fell her lifelong friend and companion, a Muslim girl. Arra. Kumwar Singh, a ruined and discontented zamindar of Jagdishpur near Arra, was the chief organizer of the uprising in Bihar. Though nearly 80 years old, he was perhaps the most outstanding military leader and strategist of the uprising. He fought the British in Bihar, and later joining hands with Nana Sahib's forces, he also campaigned in Awadh and central India. Racing back home, he defeated the British forces near Arra. But this proved to be his last battle. He had sustained a fatal wound in the battle and he died on the 27th of April 1858 in his ancestral house in the village of Jagdishpur. Awadh. Awadh had been annexed by the British for being misgoverned. The royalty, nobility, The sepoys and the common man, everyone had resented this annexation. The Nawabs of Awadh had not expected it, as they had always served the British. So they felt betrayed by the British. As most of the sepoys in the British army were from Awadh, the resentment must have spread into military circle too. Even after annexing Awadh and gaining immense power, the British did not mend their ways. They continued to torture or question the people. After annexation of Awadh, there the farmers were made to pay even higher taxes than before. Other professionals in Awadh found no patron to help them, and neither did the British make arrangements for alternative jobs for them. Lucknow was the capital of Awadh. The Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, who had been deposed, earned sympathy and support from wealthy zamindars who were from both Hindu and Muslim sects. When the rebels rose in uprising in Lucknow, the angry mass murdered the English people. The suppression of the First War of Indian Independence. The troop led by Colin Campbell and Henry Havelock got back the lost territories. Their troops gained Delhi in September 1857. The old Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar II was imprisoned and exiled to Rangoon, Burma, now Myanmar. Rani Lakshmi Bai, Bakht Khan, Kumwar Singh and Khan Bahadur Khan died in battles with the British. Begum Hazrat Mahal and Nana Sahib sought refuge in Nepal. Tantia Tope was arrested and hanged. The rebel troops and common people faced a traumatic future after the suppression of the uprising. The rebels were forcibly tied to the mouth of the cannons and their bodies blown off with the cannons. The common people were captured and hanged in public for all to see. Many people lost their lives, including children and women. These steps were taken by the British to discourage any such uprisings in India in the future. The First War of Indian Independence of 1857 proved to be a mass uprising that became widespread and popular. It was marked by Hindu-Muslim unity that made realize that combined efforts as a nation was required to be free from British rule. Reasons why the First War of Independence, 1857, failed. The First War of Indian Independence of 1857 failed due to various reasons. 1. Early start. The first reason of failure was its early start from its schedule, that is May, 1857, by a young Indian sepoy, Mangal Pandey, on the 29th of March, 1857. 2. Lack of organization. There was lack of organization and single leadership aid success of the uprising. There was no single major idea to guide them. The rebel groups had their own reasons to rebel. They had no idea what they were supposed to do after capturing Indian territory from the clutches of the British regime. 3. Lack of support from all over country. Even though many parts of India had been involved in the uprising, but not all of India was engaged in it. There were still some sections of the society who had not supported the uprising. Many kings did not support the rebels and helped the British regime to suppress the uprising. The educated Indians never took part in the uprising. 4. Lack of patriotism. There were leaders of rebels in the local areas fighting for their own causes. They were fighting for themselves, not for the nation as a whole. They were concerned about freeing their own kingdoms, and single leadership was missing. The rebels had not much money or weapons to support them. They were using old weapons while British forces had the latest weapons that served more efficiently. Searching dictionary. Cartridge. A case in which a bullet is kept. Mutiny. Revolt by soldiers. Consequences of the First War of Indian Independence. Many things resulted as a consequence of the uprising of 1857. They worked well for Indian in some cases and worse in some other cases. In 1858, there was an act issued to end the governance of the East India Company in India. This was passed by the British Parliament. Now, the British Crown reigned over India. The army was carefully reorganized by British rule to prevent such an event. Queen Victoria gave some concessions to Indians. They were not allowed adoptions, but they were given religious freedom. The Indians were now allowed to hold high post in government jobs with no discrimination on any basis. All Indians were pardoned for the uprising, but not those who had killed the British officers. The Indian army now had more British soldiers and the British took control of the artillery. Most important, the First War of Indian Independence of 1857 had awakened Indians to struggle for freedom. Fact. State. True or false. 1. The farmers were made to pay the revenue compulsorily. 2. Awadh rulers felt betrayed by the British as they had served all their promise and demands. 3. Sepoys could be promoted as officers every year. 4. The First War of Indian Independence of 1857 began on the 10th of May 1857 in Delhi. Word to know. The major centers of uprising of 1857 were Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Jhansi, Arra and Awadh. The rebels in these centers were led by Bakht Khan, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Nana Sahib, Tantiya Tope, Azimullah, Begum Hazrat Mahal, Khan Bahadur Khan and Kumwar Singh. The uprising of 1857 was begun by sepoys and gained mass support. The uprising of 1857 failed as lacked a common aim, a common idea behind it and a single leadership. India witnessed a number of uprisings from 1763 to 1856 in almost all parts of the country, but their localized protests were easy for the British to quell. 1857 is the year when the greatest mass uprising of Indians against British took place for the very first time. The collection of taxes and revenues was done strictly and their payment was made compulsory for the Indians. Indian soldiers serving in the British Army in India were called sepoys.